Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so we covered part 1 of chapter 1. I think that took about 8 sessions. And so essentially what we learned in part 1 of chapter 1 is how to receive Vedic knowledge, how Vedic knowledge is presented, and how we can understand how it's presented so that we don't misunderstand it. We also learned that since all Vedic knowledge, or knowledge that's in pursuit of the Vedic version, since it all is aimed toward the ultimate goal, that these different types of shastra, whether it's the shastras that are in goodness, passion, and ignorance in our tradition, or even shastras in other traditions, they're like maps, right? And so if we understand the principle of how to read a map, even if we have the most, what's that word, when something's very, means they don't take very much time to, crudely? Even if it's a very crudely prepared map, there's another word, but I can't think of it. Even if it's hastily prepared, if we understand the principle, then we can follow the map successfully, right? If we ask someone for directions and they just have a napkin and like a lipstick, and they're, drawing landmarks, and you're like, okay, you follow this, right? Even though it's crudely presented, if we understand the principle of following those directions, we can get there. And in a similar way, even if we have the best map that has all of the rivers, streams, cow paths, squirrel trails, whatever, if we don't understand the principles of following the directions properly, then we will not get to our destination, right? And so Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is pointing this out, that we living entities, we all have the same constitutional nature, and as such, we're all looking for the same thing. And we become attracted to systems that can bring us from where we are to where we want to be, right? So even within our tradition, there are so many sections of the Vedas, there are Puranas in goodness, passion, and ignorance, that gradually guide us from wherever we are situated to eventually pure Krishna consciousness. And so, and I'm going to try to say this word right today, as Pandava Mishai pointed out, we are simultaneously the most liberal and conservative. I did it. Hare Krishna. So, we're liberal to those who are beginners on the path, because anyone can take up this path. We all have the same eternal nature. Once we start getting serious about it, we have to become much more conservative, because this is Krishna's path that we're following. We can't just whimsically decide, oh, this is how I'm going to practice philosophy. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur started out his book saying that there are countless philosophies, but although attempting to reach the truth, they are all incomplete and mutually conflicting, being generated from illusory premises. In other words, we have to gradually shed off our illusory premises of how the world works and just accept the authorized version of the Shastra. So it starts out very liberal, not liberable. But then it gets very conservative. We have to understand that this is Krishna's path, and we have to understand it as it is. So we discussed that. We also discussed, we concluded talking about how he was just clarifying, because we actually started out speaking of this also, how we have our constitutional nature and we have our conditioned nature, and we have to understand the difference between the two. Because if we get distracted by the details of even a bona fide procedure or a process, then we will not actually attain the true goal. We have to actually tap into the principle in order to do that. And I think that summarized part 1. So part 2 is called Teachings of Lord Caitanya. So the way Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur laid out chapter 1 is first, in the table of contents, we discussed this too. So first he gives an assessment of Dharma, the primary and the secondary. So that we covered. Part 2, we're talking about the teachings of Lord Caitanya. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in this chapter is going to establish that what's being presented in this book is the teachings of Lord Caitanya. It's based on the conversations that Lord Caitanya had with the various generals that he deputized in order to preach the bhakti cult around the world. Then, after part 2, parts 3 through 5 are the 7 topics of Sambandha, and they're listed there. Krishna, Krishna's energy, rasa, the jivas in general, the jivas who are in the conditioned state, the jivas who are in the liberated state, and achintya bheda. Those are the 7 topics of Sambandha. Then part 6 of chapter 1 is going to talk about abhideya, which is the process of bhakti. And part 7 is going to talk about prayojana, which is Krishna prema. So 7, 8, 9. So it's going to become clear that the 7 topics of Sambandha. So what we're studying here is called Dashamul Tattva. It's the truth of the 10 branches. 7 of those are Sambandha. 1 of them's abhideya. 1 of them's prayojana. That's 9. Where's the 10th one? Huh? Praman, right? Because those are prameya. And what is praman?
Everything else. What means praman?
Yeah. Yes. Right. Shastra. So everything that we accept has to be coming from an authorized authority. It shouldn't be coming through our senses, our material intellect, our experiences, our sense of morality. It should always initially be coming through Shastra, authorized Shastra, through the instructions of the Guru, the examples of the sadhus. And as we're receiving that, then we have to understand these 3 subject matters that are now divided into 9, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So that's going to be just chapter 1. So part 2, teachings of Lord Caitanya. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is, in this section of the first chapter, is going to show us how he collected the information for this book. Very important, because it's quite authorized, and it's important for us anytime we're discussing anything to give reference to show that it's authorized, that it's not we're just talking amongst ourselves about, personal experiences we had, etc. We can talk about personal experiences if they're based on authorized knowledge from the Shastra that backs that up, right? So if we have a statement that's in the Shastra, and this is what the Panchanga Nyaya is all about, we know that it's true, but we don't necessarily experience why it's true yet, right? So what you do is first you present the fact that's given in Shastra, and then the next thing you do is you logically fill out how it's easier to understand according to logic, which is secondary. Then, after explaining logically how you can understand, at least in theory, that this fact is actually acceptable, we can draw off of our experiences to show how, through our perception, we've actually experienced something quite similar to what's being presented in the Shastra, right? So that's Shabda, and then Anuman, and then Pratyaksha, right? Then we show how those things, the logic and the experience that we've had, how that relates back to the original point that was given in Shastra. And then we bring it all together and show how, because of all those things, this conclusion, which was previously not necessarily known to us, can be understood logically, perceived in our daily lives, and how it can be applied back to the thing. So, Chapter 1, Part 2, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Are there any questions on Part 1 before we start Part 2? Okay, Part 2. In order to understand the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, we must first refer to Sri Caitanya Charitamrita. Lord Chaitanya himself did not leave any written works except the 8 verses of the Shikshastika. There are few verses attributed to him in the Padyavali, but from those verses we cannot take any systematic instructions. So we can get some general instructions on certain topics, but systematic instructions, just the Shikshastika. There are also a very few small books that some people claim were written by Lord Chaitanya. After examination, we must conclude that these are all false claims. From the many works that the Goswamis wrote, we can thoroughly understand that Lord Chaitanya's teachings. We can thoroughly understand Lord Chaitanya's teachings, but they do not mention any works written by Lord Chaitanya himself. Sri Caitanya Charitamrita is the authoritative work. From this work we can understand the Lord's character and teachings. These teachings are confirmed perfectly by the words of the Goswamis. For this reason, Sri Caitanya Charitamrita is given so much respect. Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj appeared immediately after Lord Chaitanya. Mahaprabhu's direct disciples, Raghunath Goswami, Rupa Goswami, and many others, assisted Krishnadas in writing his book. Before him, Kavi Karnapur had written Sri Chaitanya Chandrodaya Nataka, and Vrindavan Das Thakur had written Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. These works were a great help to Krishnadas Kaviraj. Considering all points, we have had to depend upon Sri Caitanya Charitamrita. So this is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's main source of information on Lord Chaitanya, because it's authorized, it's backed up by the teachings of the Goswamis. It's not just somebody saying, oh, I think Lord Chaitanya actually wrote this book, so let's discuss this, right? So it's, yes?
Because now you can see, so it's...
Oh, you were just waiting. Because before I had him on, you could have done that and I would have known you did it. Jai. Yes?
I want to ask in regards to the 8 verses of Shikshastika that here we are learning that Lord Chaitanya has written them. Do we know how we know that he wrote them? I mean, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying it, but like if we read Chaitanya Charitamrita, he is saying them. How do we know that he wrote them?
That I don't know. I know that some of the verses he says throughout, like Shikshastika 3, he'll be having a conversation with another devotee, so he's giving it. So these, and from what I understood, these are verses that he spoke often. So means he may not have taken a pen to paper, but he composed them. And so they were spoken frequently enough where the devotees, were able to, give him credit for his, right. But he could have also taken pen to paper. I don't know though. Does anyone know the answer to that? No.
They appear in the CC, right? At the end.
Yes.
They appear, Lord Chaitanya is saying them, just because I heard many times from the devotees, the only thing Lord Chaitanya wrote was these 8 verses. So I was always wondering, how do we know that? Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying it, so it is true, but...
Yeah, how we know, I don't know. But that was the impression that I got.
But everything we know is because the chalice says. So it's no different. You don't know anything unless somebody like Krishnadas Kaviraj Swami or Bhaktivinoda Thakur say it, or Srila Prabhupada says it. So it's how.
Yeah, and I think the way it's presented in Caitanya Charitamrita, because it's also, as he's going through the verses, he's feeling these different emotions, and then he's going, and of course Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj is then giving some commentary between them. So it seems that, at least on one occasion, or on multiple occasions, he's going through these to be able to note how his mood is accumulating these different moods as he's going through. But otherwise, yeah. I can see the front row, kind of. Not quite you. I can see Tulsi. He's still in my range. Yes?
I have a question. Before Chaitanya, his main book is, not book, his main work is Shikshashtaka, and Shikshashtaka mostly explains different stages of spiritual life, means Abhideya. Does it mean Abhideya is the main part of knowledge of Gaudiya Vaishnavas? Or if he explains mostly attitude in this book, the rasa is most important in teaching of Lord Chaitanya. What is most important? Why did he give these 8 verses?
Why did he give these 8?
What did he want? Why he wanted to explain this topic personally? If he explained, does it mean it's most important? Or what is most important?
So we can see that through these 8 verses, it's not just Abhideya, and it's not just prayer. So it brings us through the whole thing. It very much shows us what mood we need to have, what our goal should be. It tells us how to get to that goal from even a very low stage. It's essentially our entire philosophy in 8 verses, and depending on where our point of view is, what our understanding is, essentially our understanding of it evolves as we study it. Because ultimately, we are to become unflinching, unalloyed devotees who don't care if he ignores us or mistreats us. He is our Lord. That's it. The external circumstances don't mean anything to us. We're not worshiping him because he reciprocates. We're worshiping him because he is the only worshipable Lord. So if he chooses to treat me, in any other way that's not what most people would think is nice, that doesn't matter. That's up to him. Everything's up to him. Right? So this is a very elevated understanding. But we learn how to get to that understanding by chanting the holy name constantly, as Krishna is giving us this clarity while we're chanting his names, by making the proper decisions and understanding our actual nature, the sambandha, our relationship, so that we're naturally going to become humble and tolerant. Because if we know what the relationship is, what's the question of being proud? We're infinitesimal, he's infinite, right? And what's the question of not being tolerant? If nothing belongs to us, if something's taken away, of course we're going to tolerate it because it wasn't ours to begin with. So it goes through everything. Am I addressing what you were saying, or am I going on a different... Sometimes I go on tangents and it has nothing to do with what people say. I did that to your son the first year. He asked a question and I answered it for like 20 minutes. and it wasn't even his question. And then someone clarified to me what he actually asked, and then I said, oh. And it turned out it was actually the same answer, but because he was asking, what's the least that you can do to go back to Godhead? So I start listing things, because I thought he said, what's the list of things? So I start listing all of these different things that you have to do in order to qualify to get back to Godhead. And then, what was the name of that Mataji? Adibhuta's wife. I forget her name. What's her name? Chandrika, you know it. Anyway, with a V maybe. Anyway, so she clarified. She said, no. He's saying the least you can. No, I said, well, same answer, because you have to do all of those things. Because going back to Godhead's not so cheap, where it's just, I chant some mantra, I make an agreement. Okay, Krishna, I'm going to do this, and this for my whole life, and then you have to admit me back into the spiritual. It's not like that, right? And so the Shikshastika shows us that it's not like that, because the qualification to go back is to be 100% dedicated only to Krishna, no one else, and to not have any sort of attachment or expectation of what we get in return. Does that make sense? Now, did that actually address what you were asking, or was that?
I just noticed, usually when we make some course, philosophical course, for students,
Yeah.
we firstly explain Sambandha
Yeah.
systematically, and then we explain the way, like a PDF.
Uh-huh.
But in Srimad Bhagavatam, Shukadeva Goswami firstly explained stages in second chapter.
Uh-huh.
Lord Chaitanya explained himself this stage, and also in Caitanya Siksamrita, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he also explained 5 stages of human life and then different stages of bhakti inside. Means and they usually start from this explanation, and I think doesn't mean our way to explain philosophy is not so much correct. Why?
So, depending on the situation, we have to present. So, and we talked about this last year or the year before. We don't necessarily just go Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. There are periods of time when we have to sort of skip around. So, if someone is just learning Sambandha, and that's all they're doing, they're studying Sambandha. If they're not periodically reminded of what the goal is, then they're not going to be enthusiastic to keep studying. So Srila Prabhupada gave us Krishna book so that we can get tastes of that sweetness to understand, okay, this is what we're doing this for. Otherwise, it can feel like a chore, right? And if we're just talking about the process, just the process, we can think that that process is actually everything, because the process is eternal, but we think that everything that's included in that process is eternal. But there are some things that we eventually have to give up, right? So if we're just focusing on one of these things, or if we're not, from time to time, at least getting glimpses of all three, then we're not going to actually make so much advancement. We'll get stuck for whatever reasons, either due to lack of encouragement without understanding what the goal is, lack of proper instruction, not focusing on the Abhideya, or lack of, well, yeah, because that can go either way too. Because some people just want to focus on that last bit. They think that we're going to become Raganuga Bhaktas overnight without doing any sort of performance. So no Abhideya, no Sambandha. So we have to have that healthy balance. So it's not like there's an exact system of how we go through it. We have to find out, just like in the example of a map, someone asks us for directions. First we have to find out where they're coming from, and then we can instruct them how to go. Not only where they're coming from, but what they have access to. So if you say that you want directions to the temple, right? And I have to find out where you're coming from. So you're in Gornagar. Okay, that's no problem. It's very short. But I have to find out what you have access to. Do you have a bicycle? Do you have a car? Do you have a kayak? Do you have legs? Maybe you don't have legs. Maybe you're in a wheelchair. So we have to find all of these things out. Otherwise, you can't give someone the directions without understanding where they are and what facilities they have, right? So it all very greatly depends on where we are. Now, Srila Prabhupada, very expertly in his purports, presents Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana simultaneously. And even in the books, like I said, with the Shikshashtaka, all of it's there. And so we also find in Sri Gaura Ganadesh Dipika, yeah? Yes. When we're categorizing these verses into these 10 sections, we can see that some of these verses also belong in... But what did I say? Bhagavatarka Marichimala. Sorry, thank you. We can see how some of these verses actually fit into all three depending on the context, depending on our point of view. So, although they're put into specific categories, that means we can understand them in that way, but we can also see how they can carry us over into so our process isn't necessarily go through this, and this. It's find out what the person needs to understand. If they don't know the relationships between what they have and what they need to do, then you have to, at least for some time, focus on Sambandha, if that's where the weak point is. If the weak point is that they're not inspired, then you actually have to jump to Prayojana before you do Abhideya. Because if they're not inspired, you telling them how to do the process isn't going to help. If I start giving you directions to the Goshala and you don't even want to go there, you're not going to be paying attention to how to get there. But if I first tell you, oh, there's actually a festival going on at the Goshala right now, your favorite kirtana leader or your favorite lecturer happens to be there, now you're excited about it, right? So now I tell you the process. So sometimes we do, a little bit of Sambandha, then Prayojana, then Abhideya. Sometimes we have to start with Prayojana. So we have to understand and adjust based on what we're dealing with. And this isn't just as a preaching tactic, it's also a personal application tactic. We have to, I just tapped that, sorry. We have to understand where we are and what we need at the specific time in order to help our devotional growth. Do we need to remind ourselves because we're not giving up this idea of controlling and enjoying? So do we have to remind ourselves of the Sambandha, of what the relationship is? Or is it that, no, we know that very well, but we just need to clarify how exactly we get from where we are to where we need to be? Or do we have to, have a reminder of what's driving us to actually do this? Right? Does that make sense? Did that actually address what you asked? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else?
Yes. Also, Sambandha includes Abhideya and Prayojana because it's not possible otherwise to properly understand your position, what is your relationship with the Lord, etc., and the material energy. So talking about the goal and the method is proper part of Sambandha Jnana. And also the practice of Sambandha, of the knowledge, the very practice of it, sometimes it's called to be there. Not so much talking about it, or rationally understanding it, but actually practicing it. And also relishing it, because Prayojana sometimes is defined as the ultimate necessity, so it's a matter of, it's your need, the need of the soul. So relishing this in a positive sense, not like egoistically, is Prayojana. So therefore, sometimes in disco, often in disco, we heard that people who are talking about intimate pastimes of Radha Krishna, they are not on the level of Prayojana, they're discussing still Sambandha Jnana. Because Prayojana means you are there and now you're part of the scene, the relation. You're at least on the level of Baba, minimum. So I guess this also is connected to what you're talking about.
I'm just thinking that sometimes As you said, that you take in consideration the qualification of the listener, and sometimes you may explain Sambandha, as now we'll see Bhaktivinoda Thakur will explain it like for such a long time. But sometimes you see the person in front of you, he already knows all this. So you can explain it with one sentence. As you know, Sambandha is this, okay, now let's go and speak with about Pariyojana.
This is the style of the Brahma Sutras. The author, he assumes that you know. The audience is very learned, so he just has to say Shastra Unit Shastra Unit Fat, for example, and then it's a whole thing, whole menu.
It's like, let's say you give a class and you want to refer to a story, and if you see nobody knows the story, then obviously
go into detail.
Explain the story, then give the conclusion of the story. But if everybody already knows the story, you just say, as in the story of whatever, Brahmana, Sudama and Krishna, we see the conclusion is this. So just by one sentence you already jump to the conclusion, to the Pariyojana, or what are the practical things we can get for our practice.
It's worth noting that when you read or hear Srila Prabhupada's classes, he's most of the time giving class on how we're not the body, it's Sambandha. And oftentimes, we devotees who have been around for a while, when we hear classes on how we're not the body, we sort of tune out. We're like, I already know this. But we may know it in theory. We don't act like it though, because we very much act like we are this body, right? Anytime there's any sort of pain, we immediately are identifying with this body, very much so. We're very eager to eat in certain parts of the day and get the right amount of sleep, and we're less eager in general about studying Shastra, for example. So we have to understand sometimes that just because we know something in theory, it doesn't mean that we're actually applying it, right? And so when we're hearing about the Sambandha, we're simultaneously, as Pandava Mashai was pointing out, simultaneously figuring out how to act accordingly, because that's what Abhideya is. Knowing it and acting accordingly. So if we only know it, then that's a lower level. If we're actually acting accordingly, that's the higher level. And if we act accordingly a lot, all the time, then we can actually relish the goal, right? So it's the process. So we should never think that we're higher than we actually are. We should constantly assess where we are, and in that way we can know which parts to focus on. So Srila Prabhupada understood that he had to focus on, you are not the body, because we're all acting as if we're the body. My guru, when reading Srila Prabhupada's books, there's a lot of talk about the Mayavadis, the impersonalists, and they're basically our enemy. It's very dangerous to listen to them. And so my guru pointed out that at first he thought that the Mayavadis, the impersonalists, were these like old Babas in India with these gray beards that are like preaching this philosophy. But then as he was reading Srila Prabhupada and how he was describing, he realized, oh, he's talking about us. This is our mentality, this is our tendency. And so he's not telling us how to defeat these guys, how to go and preach and convert these Mayavadis. He's telling us how to get rid of that tendency within ourselves. That's the important part. I mean, if we're so inclined and it's our service, we can also do the other thing, but generally defeat the ones there first and then worry about the other ones. Good? Yes?
Question about this last point.
Sure.
My question is about, yes, we are Mayavadis, but now I want to ask, was it at that time when Srila Prabhupada preached that people had tendency to Mayavada mostly? Because as I see nowadays, the people mostly have tendency to Karmakanda. It's more attractive for contemporary people. But Yes, because people more interested in how to get some profit from studying Vedas, how to do some yagas for getting some benefits and like this. But philosophically, no one considers that we are God. No one should. Mostly people consider that yes, he is God and he should give me something. It's very spread understanding in our society, I mean in Krishna consciousness society nowadays. But I ask maybe because Srila Prabhupada preached to American people and to Western people at 70s, maybe and because people prefer some Indian philosophy, it was more...
I understand. So there are two things there. The one is that, so Srila Prabhupada didn't exclusively talk about Mayavad, he also addressed everything. The tendency to enjoy materially, the tendency to acquire knowledge, etc. So all of those he addressed thoroughly. But to the other point, absolutely we have these Mayavad tendencies. We want to be the controller and the enjoyer, and we are not. So yeah, maybe we want to enjoy, yes, that's true, but we want to enjoy because we think we're the enjoyer. So both of those tendencies are there, the tendency to enjoy separately from Krishna, and the tendency to enjoy as Krishna, right? So they're together, and so we have to rectify all of that. So it wasn't just that, in the 70s there were people interested in that sort of philosophy, and therefore maybe those parts of Srila Prabhupada's commentaries aren't as relevant. That's absolutely not the case. They're quite relevant. And if we can't see how they're relevant, then that's our misfortune, because then we're not actually understanding what our problem is. We absolutely have all of these problems. It means there are some that are more prominent in each person. And as I said, Srila Prabhupada and even Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, he makes sure that his doubts that he's expressing for our benefit is covering anyone's doubt, whether they're coming from this background or that background, or, And so Srila Prabhupada does the same thing. He makes sure that no matter where we're coming from, we're going to get everything we need to get to Krishna. But we have all of these things within us, and we have to understand to what extent each of these things are present within us. So whatever's most prominent, we address that first. And then when we see something else is actually taking us in another way, then we address that. But everyone in the material world has this Mayavad tendency because we want to be God. That's why we're here.
I just read in the Bhagavatam there was some prayer in 5th canto, the residents of Jammu, there were prayers. So one of the prayer was, I think, by Lakshmi Devi. My dear Lord, everyone in this universe, from Brahma to is envious of you.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's that.
All the demigods, everybody is envious.
Yeah. That's why we're here. That's the cause. So the very cause that we're here is because of that tendency. And so until we get rid of that, then we have to understand, because if you don't know your enemy, you can't defeat him. And so that is definitely one of our enemies. And so we have this tendency to think, oh, I don't have that issue, I don't have that problem, so I don't have to worry about that. But we have to be careful with that, because that might be the biggest problem we have. Right? And if we're ignoring it.
These things because here in Caitanya Siksamrita, Bhaktivinoda explained 5 types of knowledge, and he explains the knowledge about God and how to worship Him. It's a knowledge of search level, and knowledge about Mayavada knowledge, like Advaitavada, he explained, it's force. And if we see in levels, it's like different. But if we tell about truth of our existence here, then yes, it's one.
Yeah, there's also, so we can categorize these into different things, but there's also some overlap. We have to understand that too. That's why it's important to, when we're reading these things and understanding them, to go to the principle of it, not the detail, because we can get very distracted in the detail. An example that's going to come up is in Caitanya Siksamrita, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur defines akarma in a very different way that Bhagavad Gita defines akarma. Neither of them are wrong. They're both right. In Bhagavad Gita, akarma means performing your work engaged in Krishna service. And it's akarma because there's no reaction. You're not actually performing a material action because you're engaging in transcendental service. So that absolutely means akarma. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in this book, defines akarma as refusing to do your duty. Means a lazy person who's not engaging their activities in Krishna. So it seems to mean the exact opposite thing. But they're both right. But you can't put them together. You can't put this definition and impose it onto Bhagavad Gita's, So they're both right, but you can't cross them. So sometimes when we get these terms, we have to be careful about, there is going to be some overlap, but if we understand the principle of it all, then we'll be less distracted by, because otherwise we can get in conversations about, this term means this and this term means this, so they should be separate, but sometimes they're overlapped. So in general, that's a good policy to focus on what the principle of it is. But at the same time, we have to be able to see the differences so that we can distinguish, all right, what is the prominent issue in either myself or someone who I'm preaching to? And you can categorize it like that and then deal with it accordingly. So they're both important, to be able to list them, but to also understand what the commonalities are. Does that make sense?
Yes, now I understand. It's a point of hermeneutics, yes?
Hermeneutics.
So we should understand philosophy in context of special book. And if now we discuss Mayavada in books of Srila Prabhupada, how he explains, means we should understand his point of view, not Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Sri Caitanya Siksamrita.
I mean, that's there also. But generally, as I was saying with the story of my guru, at first he thought they were this sect in India, they were the Mayavadis. And there are people who identify as Mayavadis, and there are also Brahmavadis, and we have to know the difference between the two. But the tendency of that philosophy is also within us, so we have to see that. So, we're not, rubbing ash on our bodies and, all these sorts of things that the Mayavadis do. But we do have that philosophy and we're embracing it. And so we have to understand that and then root that out. Does that make sense? Sure. Anything else? We were at
Second paragraph.
second paragraph? We finished the first one? Okay. Yes. So considering all points we have had to depend on, Sri Caitanya Siksamrita. So this is what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is focused on. Now, during his married life until the age of 24, Lord Chaitanya would preach the glories of the holy name and the necessity of chanting the Lord's name to all souls in Srivasa's courtyard on the bank of the Ganga, in his classroom, and on the road. So all of these places, he's encouraging everyone the necessity of chanting the holy name. After taking sannyas, the Lord instructed Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya in Puri, Ramananda Rai in Vidyanagara, Venkata Bhatta in the south, Rupa Goswami as well as Raghupati Upadhyaya, and Vallabha Bhatta by trickery in Prayag, and Sanatan Goswami and Prakashananda in Varanasi. From these instructions, we can understand Lord Chaitanya's teachings as they are in truth. After going through all these teachings, the principal points of his philosophy have been presented here. So this is going to be based on all of these conversations that Lord Chaitanya had with these different personalities in these different places. And again, this section of this chapter is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's way of showing us how he got the information that he's going to present, how it's authorized. Displaying extraordinary mercy to the living entities, Mahaprabhu preached pure Vaishnava Dharma or Jaiva Dharma all over India. He himself went to some places and preached. To other places he sent preachers to do the work. Giving the preachers unlimited spiritual power, Lord Caitanya sent them out to all places, and impelled by the prema he had bestowed on them, they took up the task without expectation of pay or reward, for only a preacher of pure heart can preach pure dharma. In the present age, in various religions, people preach to earn a living. This, however, cannot give the intended result. There's so much we can say on that last sentence. There's a tendency these days because, and there are so many excuses given, justifications, of why we should just charge people for courses and kirtans and things like that. There's some precedents. Srila Prabhupada at one point, for the feasts, he was requiring a $1 donation, just because there should be something so there's some appreciation. But taking that precedence to charging $65 for a kirtan or something like that, that's a steep step. It's not necessarily wrong because in Kali Yuga, especially in the West, in America, people don't understand that Brahmana people who are actually Brahminical, they're maintained by donations. They don't understand that. So if they're not told that they should give something, at least say suggested donation, they're probably not going to. But we have to be very careful because Brahmana means that they're detached. They're giving the message that's given in Shastra without any attachment whatsoever. So we see throughout time, we can see the degradation of the Varnashrama system, where there are kings who have advisors, so they'd have the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas have their Brahmanas, but the advisors over time become owned by the king, and they can't be honest anymore, right? We see that, where instead of the advisors just being frank and detached to their leader, they're afraid of their head getting cut off, so they just try to appease the leader and they say something different just so that they don't get killed, right? And so, but that's not the Brahminical nature. The actual Brahminical nature is, I know he's going to kill me after I tell him the truth, and it doesn't matter because my duty is to tell the truth according to Shastra. So when the Brahminical nature leaves the people in the position of Brahminical posts, everything is lost, right? So the people who are preaching should do so for preaching's sake. I'll just use Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's word. And he's talking about, so giving the preachers unlimited spiritual power, Lord Caitanya sent them out to all places, and impelled by prema, he has bestowed on them. They took up the task without exception of pay or reward. They're sleeping under different trees every night. They're spending day and night writing these literatures and renovating the holy places. All they care about is spreading Krishna consciousness. And that's it. That's enough. For only a preacher of pure heart can preach pure dharma. If we don't have a pure heart, we're not preaching pure dharma. We're preaching secondary dharma. And we know that the result of secondary dharma is you stay here in the material world. In the present age, in various religions, people preach to earn a living. This, however, cannot give the intended result. If this is our goal, if this is our motive, then we can't reach the proper goal. And it's as simple as that. So we have to be very careful about how we are preaching, what our motive is. If our motive is to get by, to maintain a roof over our heads or anything like that, then we're not going to be giving the pure dharma. It's called a conflict of interest, right? In the same way, there are people who are qualified to both give counsel and to manage. But you should never do both, because if you're managing, that means you have to make sure that everything's getting done, right? If you're giving counsel, counsel means that the only thing that matters is counseling this person. So if you're also simultaneously a manager, that's a conflict of interest. Because although I know what's best for you right now, currently the schedule won't quite work, so it's going to slow down the process one way or another. So even if you have the best intentions, you can't do both at the same time, right? So let the person who's more inclined to, has more Kshatriya tendencies manage, and the more Brahminical person, let them counsel. Even though someone can do both, sure, no problem. But you can only do one at a time in those circumstances. Anyway, like I said, a lot can be said about this, but I think, as Tulsi Guru said, I think we already kind of know it, so we can just, I hope we do, I hope we understand it. I don't know if saying anything more on it's going to make us understand it more, but anyway, we have to understand, yes, go ahead.
So just for practical sake, let's say, what if a devotee opens a restaurant and sells prasadam, or he opens a bookstore and sells the books of Srila Prabhupada, and he's maintaining his life in this way. Is this different from what it is said here, or how to understand it?
It is a bit different because
or even just to add, or even a grihastha, let's say, who is just full-time distributing books, and in this way he's maintaining whatever his family.
So, okay, so it is different, and it also depends on the consciousness. Because there is a way to distribute books and to live off of whatever is coming in a very detached way. The motive can be that I'm doing this for Krishna. Whatever donations come, giving the books like that, and Hare Krishna. It can be like that. But we've seen many times, I'm sure you've seen many examples, where neophytes, they start distributing books, they start seeing how much money can be collected from doing such a simple task, and then they start thinking, oh, I could get this, and this, I could start living very comfortably. And then eventually they go away and become door-to-door salesmen of something else, something easier to sell, right? Encyclopedias or whatever. I know a guy that did that.
Picture.
Huh?
Painting.
Paintings, stickers, candy. That was a big one in Philadelphia, Jolly Ranchers. You'd buy a whole bag of Jolly Ranchers. They're like rock candy. You stand out on the street and you say, here you go. We're collecting donations for whatever you made up that day. And most people are giving $5, So you're giving a thing that cost you like a penny, and you're getting $5 for it. Way better than selling the book that cost you 12 cents and you're only getting $1 for it, right? So if you're seeing it as a business transaction, it's not going well. So even with the actual books, if the intention is to make money, you're not getting benefit. They may get benefit if they read the book. They're getting benefit that they're taking the book. That's nice. So in other words, there's a lot going on there. Now with the example you gave of someone opening a bookstore, so that's a different thing, because that is someone that's trying to have a business so that they can maintain their life, but they want to make sure that it's actually also Krishna conscious. So again, depending on the consciousness, it could go either way. That's the tricky part. Just like the, how is it? It's similar to the bee licking the jar of the honey. The secret is actually you have to go in, you can't get the taste without going in. So the consciousness, it's the same thing. If we don't actually have the consciousness of serving Krishna in a detached way, we're not going to get the proper result. But the example you gave about a bookstore or a restaurant, you can have the consciousness of either, depending. So, could be good, could be not so good. Definitely better than opening a restaurant where you're not offering anything. Yes.
I remember a few lectures ago you gave this example of, correct me if I'm wrong, but you gave this example of, depends on, let's say if you put it in percentage scale, it depends on how much percent of our intention is going for Krishna and how much percentage is going for us.
Yeah.
So depending on what percentage is for Krishna, that's what we will get out as.
Yeah. As we surrender unto Krishna, he rewards us accordingly. So it's a reciprocal thing. So wherever our consciousness is focused on serving Krishna, then we get that much benefit. Wherever it's thinking that I am the maintainer of this or the enjoyer of the fruits, then less. But for preaching, so that's like a business, that's a thing. If we're preaching, then we shouldn't expect anything in return. Now, of course, the tradition's there that, anyway, we all know the tradition. I don't want to say it because then it'll look like I'm trying to get donations. I'm not. The motive should always be that we teach because this is what our purpose is. If Krishna wants me to sleep under a tree like the Goswamis, then I'll sleep under a tree like the Goswamis, right? If he wants me to have a slightly more comfortable, situation, then that's also fine. So, even if the Lord handles me roughly in his embrace, or if he ignores, whatever, he is my Lord. So that should be the mood of the brahmanas. Just like anyone that's in management, their natural tendency should be to protect people. That's what kshatriya means. Kshat means harm, and triya, it comes from trayate, which means to liberate. So kshatriyas deliver people from harm. If they see someone that's in harm, kind of like the Vaishnavas have this paraduka dukkhi, so the kshatriyas also have this. Even if they're not proper Vaishnavas, they still have this tendency where if they see someone suffering, they want to give them protection, naturally. So if someone's in management and doesn't have that quality, it's not going to go well. So we see often is that people who are in management, they're more interested in profit. You look at these governments these days, they don't make policy based on protecting the citizens. They make it on whether it's profitable or not. So laws are made based on profit. So they're not actually kshatriyas. So people aren't actually being taken care of. They're being exploited. Right? So we have to know what our natures are, and we have to engage our nature accordingly. We shouldn't, if we have a Vaishya mentality or a Shudra mentality, we shouldn't take up the post of a Kshatriya. Similarly, we shouldn't take up the post of a Brahmana if we don't have that tendency. Now, everybody can preach, and however, to whatever extent we can preach in a detached way will be the success. So, means we're all meant to be preachers. So whatever we hear from bona fide authority, we repeat in whichever opportunity comes up, arises, that's there. And if we're detached, then we'll get proper benefit. If we're not, then we're just mundane teachers, essentially. Anything else? Was that too harsh? I just got a face, no? Okay. Yes, okay, so this cannot give the intended result. In the Caitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 7, is where we're going to start tomorrow. That's why you gave the face. You're like, time's up. Stop talking.
Listen.
Yeah, that's time to stop, Chara. Thank you. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.